Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Kelly has not been at ease all day. Her only son Martin, her pride and hope, had decided to marry. And to whom? A woman with a child. And he was only 25. His whole life was ahead of him. The woman sighed heavily and thought, no, this was not the fate she had dreamed of for her only son. She raised him alone. She didn't sleep a wink. She didn't finish her last bite, denying herself everything just to give him the best of everything. And this is how he thanked her. She waited for him from the army, counting the days of his return. Then Martin enrolled in the institute. How happy she was when she received her diploma. Red, by the way. She was proud of him, dreaming that such a handsome young man would marry only the best girl in the world. And where did she get her head from? He hadn't even met anyone yet. He treated girls with outright disdain. When asked when he was getting married, he replied with a chuckle, "What have I done wrong to you? A good deed is not a marriage." And once again, he was absorbed in his work, in his favorite computer. And then one day he frankly confessed, as if wishing to put an end to such conversations. "Mom, I don't like kids. I'm not a father, you know. I can't stand these children's roars, their whims, diapers. It's not my thing." And what about girls? They have the maternal instinct. They all sooner or later will want to have children, and I'm not ready for it. I do not want. I'm a child free. And then he stared at the computer again, breaking his mother's heart. Kelly didn't even know the word, but it horrified her. There was something so hopeless, so irreversible about it. She was very worried about his attitude toward marriage because she wanted grandchildren, but her own, not someone else's. At work, too, she could not shake off her obsessive thoughts. Having laid out the report in front of her, the woman forced herself to concentrate on it, but her memory stubbornly returned her to the problem that had arisen. At first, she noticed that her son was constantly corresponding with someone. He often received messages of some kind. Looking at his animated face, her heart fluttered with joy. Maybe he had finally met someone. And while she was preparing to ask him leading questions, her son suddenly started a conversation on his own with determination. "Mom, don't worry about it, but I've decided to get married. We'll live separately because I don't want your womanly quarrels. And also, she has a small child. But you yourself dreamed of a grandchild. As you see, dreams come true." He smiled, kissed my mother on the cheek, finished his coffee, and rushed off to work. And my mother was left standing in the kitchen, forgetting that she, too, was late for work. That day, everything was falling out of her hands. Her boss, noticing her condition, sent her home to rest. In the evening, she tried to get her son to talk. "Martin," she began cautiously, "tell me about your chosen one. Who is she? Where did you meet her? How old is she? And why is she alone with a child? After all, I'm a mother, and I need to know who my son's future wife is." "Oh, Mom, come on, I know where you're going with this." The son grimaced and asked her a counter question. "Why were you left alone with a child? Why did you orphan me? All my life I suffered because I didn't have a father, and I haven't even heard a sensible answer from you. Where is he, and what's wrong with him?" Kelly even choked on her tea and stared at him. "But you never asked. I thought it didn't matter to you." "I asked, Mom, and I well remember your answer. Son, are the two of us bad together?" That was the end of our conversation. I already knew then that this topic was taboo for you, and I was suffering very much, imagining my father, talking to him mentally, almost every day, advising him, resenting him for not being with me, for not seeing me grow up, not going to the circus or fishing with me. And he cried quietly when he saw his friends playing soccer with their fathers or going on picnics at the lake with their families. All I had to do was watch, begrudgingly. Kelly had a lump in her throat and a pounding in her temples as she recalled the circumstances under which she had become a single mother. Kelly was graduating from college, doing pre-graduation internship at the company when she met Michael. He was a leading specialist, young, promising, knowledgeable in his business from start to finish, a recent graduate of the same university. That's why the director of the enterprise led all the trainee students to him, under his wing, because he was confident in his professionalism as in his own. Kelly remembered for the rest of her life that first meeting, when their eyes met, and her heart broke in an instant. No man had ever had that effect on her before, so she left the shop like she was thunderstruck, unable to make sense of her feelings. She practiced with a classmate, Emily, who immediately noticed her condition and then laughed at her for a long time. "You should have seen your face, Kelly." It had giant letters on it that said, "Misha, you're a miracle." "Yes, Emily, I think I'm lost. When I look at him, I can't hear anything. There's silence all around. I can only see his face and his eyes." "You wait, my friend, fall in love. What if he's married?" Emily interrupted her. "It can't be that kind of man," and was alone. "I have no pretensions. I'm no match for him." "Come on. You should always know your worth, especially you. Haven't any of the men ever told you you're beautiful?" The next day, the ubiquitous Emily already knew all the necessary information about him. And where did she find out everything? "He's recently divorced, no kids, but he's had a very painful divorce," Emily babbled, trying to get all the information to her friend quickly. "The local girls say that he is not dating anyone yet. Too hard for him in that marriage. Now he blows on water. But from this we conclude that he is not a womanizer, and that is worth a lot. You see, his love for his ex-wife is still in his heart, and you have to respect that. He's had enough of souring and living in the past," her friend reasoned wisely. "Let's start a counter-terrorist operation to rehabilitate him mentally." "Did you even understand what you said?" "Okay, first of all, you need to have an Oriental therapy session to improve your self-esteem. It helps me a lot from time to time." So she dragged a perplexed Kelly to the Oriental Bazaar before work. There weren't many people in the market at that early hour, so their appearance resonated with the men. The girls vanished like molasses in the sweet speeches and compliments that echoed from all sides. "Way, what girls? Beauties, peaches, don't pass by. Take it. Treat yourself. All for you. Nat, beauties, come to us." They beckoned from the other side. Such princesses deserve the best. From all sides, cheers and rapturous glances flew toward them. Everyone was honored to shove their goods into the hands of passing beauties. Some had melons, some had bags with apricots or peaches and strawberries. Some had walnut sherbet and Turkish delight. Stunned by this abundance of attention, the girls did not know where to put the wealth of Oriental sweets and fruits that had fallen on them. "Here's the bag." Some teenager ran up to them, helping them stuff all the presents into a huge bag and looking at them with admiration. So their self-esteem went through the roof. The girls came to work in the best of spirits, laughing themselves to death and sharing their overflowing emotions and impressions. "Hello, beauties," Michael greeted them on the threshold of his office, causing another burst of laughter. "You wouldn't believe it." Emily wiped her eyes from her tears, holding her stomach. "This is the 1,000th time we've been beautiful today. We've gone to the market. We've done our shopping." "Oh, I can't. Ha ha." The blushing Kelly was so beautiful at that moment that he couldn't help but stare at her. And she, catching his gaze, did not look away as before, but held it longer. And suddenly she felt a powerful reciprocal spark. Michael, despite his experience of marriage, proved to be a very shy guy. His voice changed when he talked to Kelly. His hands trembled when he showed her something. But he made no attempt to woo her, even though the practice was nearing its end. "Girl, you've got him," said Emily. "I can see his face changing. He's worried sick, even blushing. But something prevents him from taking the first step," responded Kelly sadly. "Well, we'll make it ourselves. We should invite him to a picnic out of town. It's very simple. We'll tell him that we're afraid of being alone, so we invite him with us as a protector. He won't be able to refuse us." And Emily looked at her friend triumphantly. waiting for her approval. But she was hesitant for some reason. "I don't see any enthusiasm, and you're no good to me." Emily waved her hand in frustration and went in search of Michael. To her delight, Michael did not break down. Moreover, he accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. "That's a great idea," he exclaimed. "I've been thinking about inviting you to a place to have an informal conversation. My dacha is empty this week. My mother is away with a friend on a vacation, and the garden is my responsibility. We could even spend the whole weekend there, if you don't mind, of course. We're all for it. It's been a long time since we've been outdoors. Isn't that right, Kelly?" She turned to her friend. She smiled back embarrassedly. Michael's cottage was bursting with flowers and greenery. The gazebo was all covered with wild grapes, which reliably protected me from the heat on a summer day. And the cozy wooden house was very roomy. "We have 2 small bedrooms on the second floor. You can have both of them. We always have guests sleeping there." "How great!" they all exclaimed in one voice, and immediately rushed to take their places in the room with excitement. The day flew by like a blink of an eye. The girls helped to weed and water the beds, and the rest of the day they all spent together at the river, swimming and sunbathing. Michael was surprisingly uninhibited and cheerful, constantly joking and teasing his friends, apparently relaxed by the holiday. In the evening, they had a real party with bardic and red wine. Michael brought his guitar and sang his favorite college and army songs to them until midnight. "I'll leave early," Emily whispered in Kelly's ear, "and you stay with him. It's time for some privacy." And she, citing fatigue, went to bed. I don't know whether it was the wine or the seclusion that gave Michael the courage, but just as the door slammed shut behind Emily, he put the guitar aside with determination and pulled Kelly to him. It was something crazy, dizzying. He kissed her with a kind of painful, frenzied passion, as if for the first and last time in his life. The next morning he avoided looking her in the eye, and Kelly was horrified to realize that the passion that had blazed in their fire that night had been suppressed by him. Something was keeping him from giving in to his feelings without looking back, or someone, and those feelings had flashed so brightly that night that it was impossible to resist them. And Kelly didn't try to. She had given herself to them with all the fervor of a young soul in love. And now she didn't know what to do about it. The last week of practice was real torture. Kelly went there as if she were a convict, unable to look at someone else's beloved face. Michael did not look her in the eye, kept away, was sullen and taciturn. Emily couldn't find room for herself, feeling like a guilty procuress. In the evenings when they were alone, they both cried in their arms, unable to comprehend the strange zigzags of life. Why? Why? Kelly asked the question endlessly, her eyes swollen with tears, staring deep inside herself. Why is he doing this to me? I could feel that he was in love too. It's probably because of his ex-wife, Emily suggested. He can't get over her. Get him out of your mind, dear. He's not worth your tears. But to forget him so easily and so quickly did not work. That first love, which flashed like a bright star, was also the last love for the man. Because after 9 months, the most important person in her life appeared. Martin had a lifelong dream of finding his father, wherever he was and whatever he was. He tried a couple of times to talk to his mother, but she was evasive, her mood declined, and the son gave up the idea of finding out anything from his mother. It all started with the arrival of my mother's student friend Emily. They hadn't seen each other for more than 10 years when Emily finally deigned to visit them from out of town. As always, bright and beautiful, Emily exuded confidence. At first, Martin did not pay much attention to her, a friend and a friend. But one night he suddenly woke up, as if someone had woken him. He listened. From the kitchen, which was next to his room, came the muffled voices of his mother and her friend. They were talking in whispers, but in the silence of the night, their voices could be heard more clearly than ever. "Kelly, did you notice how much Martin looks like Michael?" Emily whispered, and Martin froze in surprise. You don't say, girl, his mother sighed sadly. Sometimes I look at him, and it makes my heart bleed. He's just like Michael. Martin's temples rattled, and he held his breath to make sure he didn't miss a word. Did you even find out what's wrong with him? Emily wouldn't let up. I follow him on Facebook, Kelly said. There's not a lot of information there, but he looks fine. There's always some young woman and a kid about 5 in the picture with him. Maybe a daughter with a grandson, maybe a young wife. And her friends even laughed at such an assumption. Then there was a pause. Martin waited in suspense, afraid that they would interrupt the conversation or move it to something else. Maybe you shouldn't have been so scared to tell him about the baby, Emily went on. I'll tell you, my friend, I went to see him. Once, said Kelly, I had the courage. You're such a partisan, you didn't even tell me. Emily interrupted her amazed. So, tell me more. What's there to tell? I came to the shop, looking for him, and they told me his wife had come to see him. They had gone somewhere together. When I kept walking, I saw them sitting in a corner, like 2 sweet doves. They could see no one around, hugging each other, whispering. My tears started to choke me, and I ran away, not seeing anything in front of me. You had just gone home. You weren't there, so I crushed everything inside me at that moment. And I swore to myself that I would never speak of him again. Well, you see, I didn't keep my word. I didn't even tell Martin anything about him. He's a hothead. He'll come looking for me. Why ruin a man's life? He made his choice. I saw the way he looked at her. And I saw the way he looked at you then, Emily whispered. It was just a flash of lightning. It flashed and went out, Kelly answered sadly. It was like lightning, bright, beautiful, but fleeting, flashing, and gone. Soon the friends went to bed, and Martin never slept a wink that night. His heart was pounding so frantically, and he was overwhelmed with emotion and feelings that it was impossible to sleep. From that moment on, he began to act secretly. While his mother was at work, he snuck into her laptop and found him, Michael, and his daughter Evelyn. It was with his daughter that he began his main operation. He was not accustomed to walking around for a long time, so he began to act decisively. He wrote her a letter. Hello, Evelyn. According to the information we have, I am your brother, but our father knows nothing about it. So I suggest we meet as soon as possible. I don't know about you, but I am immensely glad I found you. Evelyn answered him immediately, within an hour. Hello, brother. Frankly speaking, I too was pleased with the news of the kinship, although the news is rather unexpected. Anyway, we should meet and discuss all this. I'm glad we live in the same city. I suggest we meet at Adele's Cafe downtown, next Saturday, 5 p.m. Already half an hour before the meeting, Martin was sitting at the cafe table, looking at the door impatiently. Evelyn arrived at 5 o'clock sharp, as promised. She ran a quick glance around the room, saw his waving hand, and walked up with a smile. She was not alone, but with her son. I'm sorry I'm not alone, she said, smiling embarrassedly. I didn't have anyone to leave Dan with. He and I don't even split up on the weekends. Martin jumped up and sat them down at the table. Will we have dessert or something more substantial? Frostbite, Dan murmured amusingly, apparently learning to pronounce it. Well, an ice cream is an ice cream. Martin smiled as he leafed through the menu and furtively looked at his newfound relatives. Evelyn was the kind of girl he liked very much, both inwardly and outwardly. She was short, slender, graceful, with a gentle voice, radiant eyes, and a lovely smile. Very feminine and calm. Martin immediately began to melt in her presence, but then inwardly he pulled himself together. She's your sister. He liked Dan very much too, even though he didn't like children. But he couldn't help liking this boy, with his mother's radiant eyes and childlike naivete. They sat, ate ice cream, chatted about all sorts of things, teased Dan and laughed. And Martin felt surprisingly at ease in their company, as with the closest people. But one question really bothered Martin, and he embarrassedly asked it. Evelyn, how will you tell your mother about me? Didn't your father cheat on her? Evelyn became a little sad, thoughtful, and then answered, Mom is long gone, and she'll never know it. She died in a car accident. My father has been bringing me up since I was 10 years old, and my grandmother helps. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. It's been a long time. You'd better tell me about your mother. I know my father is a one-woman man, so it's hard for me to believe. But as soon as I saw you, I knew you were his son. The resemblance is amazing. You don't need any proof. It happens. I'm really glad you exist, believe it or not. She extended her hand to him with a smile, and he gratefully shook her palm. My mother never told me who my father was. Apparently, she tried her best to forget him. And she was also afraid I'd start looking for him. Martin smiled embarrassedly, and only recently I overheard them talking to a friend. I think he was divorced when they had that quickie Martin. She wanted to tell him about the baby, came to work, but found your mother in his arms. Yes, they had a complicated relationship. Evelyn nodded, because of his mother and because of me. Martin threw a surprised look at her. Yes, you heard right. Because of me. Because I'm not his biological daughter. He fell in love with my mother when I was 2 years old. He married against his mother's will, but she still wouldn't let them live. My mother left him several times to end the whole whistleblower thing. But he kept bringing her back, explaining that he couldn't live without us. Yeah, and he loved me like I was his own. God never gave them children together. Or maybe it was because they were living on a powder keg. Evelyn was silent and thoughtful, and Martin sat stunned by such a dramatic story, not even knowing what to say to him. But Evelyn herself continued her story. When Mom died, her sister wanted to take me away, but Dad wouldn't. He said, "She's my only joy, don't deprive me of her." And my grandmother suddenly woke up loving me. I don't know if it was conscience or belated remorse, but she surrounded me with such love and care that I could not even dream of. All her previous dislike for me, I understand that because of me she was keeping them from living, was suddenly transformed into such a power of love. But I was wary for a long time. I didn't believe her. Evelyn wiped away a sudden tear and smiled. And then I forgave her and fell in love with her. She was like a mother to me. One day I heard my father say to her bitterly, Mother, where was your love and wisdom before? Why is it that only with bitter loss comes understanding?" Evelyn shook her head, as if to drive away the sorrowful memories, and smiled. And now I am the happiest in the world, and the most beloved daughter and granddaughter, and now a sister too. And Martin, looking at her, suddenly thought enthusiastically, "Thank God, not a sister." "Tell me about my father," Martin asked. "I don't know anything about him." "What's there to tell?" Evelyn smiled. "His main purpose in life is us and work. He is the head of the production of furniture for offices. He started the whole shop from scratch. It's his brainchild. It's a rare occasion when he doesn't sleep at work. He lives by it. He also tries to spend time with me and his grandson. Why didn't he marry again? After all, he seemed like a good-looking man. Well, I told you, he's a one-woman man. I worry all the time myself that he's single, but he's withdrawn into himself and doesn't want to talk about it at all. He just makes jokes. He says, 'Why should I share my love with anyone else? You are enough for me.'" They were silent for a while, each thinking about his own things, and suddenly Evelyn exclaimed joyfully, "Martin, what about your mother? She never got married either, did she? So she waited for him, loved and waited. Was she a one-woman woman too?" Martin flinched at her unexpected cry and stared at her. "Exactly," he slapped his forehead. "I was selfish, thinking only of myself, that I would have a father, and the fact that she is alone and may be suffering from unrequited love. Somehow it did not occur to me." And he looked at Evelyn with guilty eyes. "Oh, you men," she shook her head. "Don't see past your own noses. It's good that there are us women." And laughing, She patted him on the shoulder. So, Plan A, introduce you to your father. Plan B, we do the recon at your house. I'll talk to your dad about your mom, and you talk to your mom about your dad. Find out how they really feel about each other. I understood that his mother loved him, but I doubt that he loved him back, said Martin bitterly. I think it was an accident, just an impulse. So what? Evelyn interrupted him with a challenge. But what a nice guy they've got. It couldn't be better. And she looked into his eyes with a smile and even admiration, and he realized that he was completely lost, drowning in her radiant eyes. But with an effort of will, he pulled himself together. Now, do not get distracted. We are discussing an important matter. If there was this impulse, it means there was sympathy, Evelyn continued confidently. And then it's 2 steps to love. So, let's not waste time. Tomorrow you come to us to meet your father, and I'll try to find out everything in the evening and get him ready. In the evening, when all the chores were done and Dan was tucked into bed, Evelyn called her father into the kitchen for tea and conversation. She set the table nicely, laid out dessert and fruit, poured aromatic herbal tea with dried berries, which her grandmother had stocked at the cottage, and she even lit candles to create a romantic atmosphere, to create a better memory. Tell me, Papa, Evelyn began, when they had already taken their first sips of tea. Did you have any love when you were young, besides my mother? No, he shook his head. There was sympathy, of course, but love alone. Do you wish you had more children? Yes, I wanted a son very much, Dad sighed, but God apparently decided differently, so it was necessary. But all my love is yours, and Dan is my son and grandson all in one. Daddy, his daughter interrupted him. What would you say if you had an illegitimate adult son? You've been watching your women's shows again, Michael laughed. It's a lot of passion there, but in life it's much more prosaic. Okay, let's go around the other side, Evelyn said stubbornly. You remember Kelly, the student who interned at your factory? Michael's hand trembled, and a cup of tea tipped over, pouring over the colored tablecloth in his pants. A lump went up to his throat. He moved sharply away from the table, and Evelyn jumped up, trying to wipe away the flood with a rag. And in her heart she rejoiced. He remembered her, remembered her. Why do you ask? He asked hoarsely, trying to calm the cramp in his throat. How do you know about her? I know, Evelyn answered quietly, looking intently at her father. I met her son today. And catching his astonished look, she added firmly, with your son. He looks like you like 2 peas in a pod. What did you said? Michael clutched at his head. His goddamn heart had first sprung up in his throat, and now it was jerking somewhere in his temporal region, trying to jump out, and he struggled to hold it in. He looked at his daughter with a blurred look, and she, bony with horror, and cursing herself to hell for intemperance, rushed to him. Dad, what's wrong with you? I'm fine. Don't worry. I'm sorry I'm so quick. You know how I can't hold it in. It tears me apart. I'll get some valerian. And she rushed into the room in search of medicine, while Michael, clutching his head with his hands, tried to calm the rebellious blood. Evelyn rushed over with the bottle, and within seconds the kitchen smelled of valerian. After she gave her father a drink, she dosed herself with an impressive dose of valerian. Daddy, Daddy, she whispered, crouching in the chair beside him and stroking his shoulders affectionately, like a child. You have no idea how glad I am that Martin found us. How wonderful that Kelly came into your life then. And she gave you Martin. To all of us, it's really a gift from fate. He's wonderful. You have no idea. Tomorrow you'll see him. She spoke and spoke, her soft, lulling speech flowing with her tears in a steady stream. She didn't even wipe the tears away. She just didn't notice. She smiled through them and spoke again, rocking beside her father, as if lulling him to sleep. Suddenly he groaned and grabbed his head again. God, Evelyn, I'm such a bastard. She'll never forgive me. I can't even imagine what she was going through, and what she was going through with the baby. His eyes were once again confronted by the old past. Lately, it had faithfully begun to return to him in his dreams, almost every night. He had borne this guilt all his life for the time when he could not resist the charms of a young student. He saw her amorous eyes, and they drove him crazy. And that night, he just lost his head. He felt a terrible twinge of conscience toward both his ex-wife and Kelly. So he betrayed them both. That morning, he went out to the girls as if he were about to mount the scaffold. It was unbearable to see her puppy dog eyes. They drove him crazy, asking the same question. Why? Why? He felt like a vile traitor, but he couldn't help himself. He could not give up Betty, the love of his life. Somehow it never occurred to him that that one crazy night could have made a child. He and Betty had tried to conceive many times and never got anywhere. But here he was, from the first one and only time. Why didn't she say anything to me then? Did she really think I would refuse the baby? He mumbled as if he were delirious. I wouldn't have given it up for anything. And you too, daughter. Dad, I know. Evelyn interrupted him firmly. But I guess it was meant to be. You'd just tear yourself apart between us, and you'd burn quickly. You've suffered all your life. We've all suffered. Maybe it's time to finally be happy. She looked at him hopefully with her lovely, soul-searching eyes, her mother's eyes, as if the rest of their lives depended on his decision, their happiness. Dad, don't think I'm judging you. In the situation you were in, when you were coming and going, your impulse was just a desperate attempt to find happiness. But you repressed it. Michael looked at his daughter in amazement. She seemed to read his mind, to know all his feelings. He hugged her gratefully and held her to his heart. You're the best daughter I ever had. Thank you. They talked half the night. It was probably the first heart-to-heart talk they'd ever had, as they picked up the problems of the past layer by layer, scraping all the skeletons out of the closets, trying to clean all the wounds that had accumulated over time, to heal them once and for all. And already lying awake in bed, digesting her experience, Evelyn suddenly realized why she and her husband had turned out this way in life. Trevor was divorced and had a young daughter from a previous marriage. Just before their wedding, his ex-wife suddenly stepped up and decided to win her husband back, causing a scandal. For Evelyn, it was a blow, a real tragedy. And although he assured the girl that all this would pass, Evelyn resolutely broke up with him. And they indeed got back together with his ex-wife and still live quite amicably. And he takes his son to his house on the weekends, and his wife Dan fell in love with him. She had long suffered from what seemed to her to be an injustice, but today she suddenly understood clearly. It was a boomerang return to them all, for her father and mother, for her grandmother, for the abandoned Kelly and her fatherless child. She suddenly felt it with all her soul and realized it, and her resentment was released overnight. The next morning, in spite of the sleepless night, Evelyn woke up surprisingly refreshed and awake. Dan woke up bright and early and was quietly constructing something on his desk. He was always like this. When he went to kindergarten, he couldn't get up, and when he had a day off, he was up and about in the morning. Evelyn smiled and kissed her son on the top of his head, and he rubbed the back of his head against her shoulder like a kitten, not even tearing himself away from his favorite activity. After all, how great it is that she has Dan, the best child in the world, the most beloved man. What would she do without him? Thank you, Trevor. Evelyn thought of her former lover with warmth for the first time in years. How wonderful it was to live without resentment, with an open heart, with joy in her soul. What colors life played with at once. And also, today she would meet her half-brother. A warm wave swept over her head at these thoughts. God, how happy she was for her father, for both of them, that they had found each other. And of course, for herself. It was a pleasure to talk to a man like Martin. I wish there were more such gifts of fate. Evelyn went into the kitchen in the best of moods. Her father was already in full swing, wearing her apron. He was chopping something masterfully on a plank, dancing and humming. Evelyn even jumped softly in her palm, so as not to embarrass him. Now that's news. Daddy's in the kitchen too. What kind of fly bit him? Good morning, my daughter. Her father greeted her cheerfully. I decided to bake a pizza. Yesterday I found a simple recipe on the internet. Let me think. I'll surprise you. I have to admit, I'm already surprised. Evelyn smiled all over her mouth. And don't laugh. If you ask for more, I won't give it to you. My father took offense. Come on, Daddy. She kissed him somewhere around the ear. How dare I? Do you need helpers? Together they made a very appetizing pizza in no time. And Dad was over the moon about his successful debut in the kitchen. You know, daughter, I'm so excited about this upcoming meeting. What am I going to tell him? I don't think I can even look him in the eye. My father muttered in confusion. Hello, showing up after all these years. He was nervous. His mood changed minute by minute. He was euphoric. And then in a moment he was despondent. You'll be fine, Evelyn reassured him. I think you two will get along. From what I understand, Martin has been dreaming of finding you all his life. Maybe to tell him what a wretch I am for leaving him and his mother alone. Michael interrupted her bitterly. Evelyn only looked sadly at her father. Lord, help them understand and accept each other, she pleaded mentally. Martin, please don't judge your father too harshly. Martin, contrary to expectation, was also having a hard time getting ready for his father. The long-awaited reunion he'd been dreaming of for so long suddenly faded, losing its bright colors. Childhood resentments, memories of his childhood sharpened, and he was horrified to feel the rapid decline of his mood and the fading of his intention to meet his father. Why had he found him? After all, he was living happily with his mother. What else did he need? Why does he always find problems for himself? At the appointed time, he stood at the cherished door, gathering all his will into a fist and trying to press the bell. But his fingers seemed stiff and refused to serve. Another moment, and he would have run away shamefully. But the door suddenly opened. Evelyn was standing in front of him with a garbage bag in her hands. Oh, hi. She took one look and immediately understood his mood. She tossed the bag aside. Come in. Don't worry, she whispered, taking his jacket. Make yourself at home. A tall, stately man, with a gray in his thick hair, walked toward Martin, extending his hand to him as he went. It's a pleasure. Very, very pleasure, he muttered, terribly anxious, shook Martin's hand for a long time, blushing childishly, looking into his face, and trying to catch his mood. And then suddenly he couldn't stand it, grabbed him in his arms, and squeezed him so tightly that his bones cracked. Well, hello, son. Oh, come on, you'll strangle him in your bear hug. Evelyn jokingly rushed to his rescue, taking Martin away from him, and we won't even have time to enjoy his company. We need him alive. Evelyn turned out to be a real lifesaver. With her smile and cute jokes, she diluted their awkwardness, relieved the tension, and after half an hour, after drinking wine to get to know each other, Martin felt the tension slowly melting away and clearing up in his head. Hello, Father, he suddenly said with a bitter smile, raising his glass. How long I've been looking for you. After that meeting, Martin frequently visited his father. That day, he suddenly realized with despair that no matter how hard he tried, he and his father were strangers. Their time was gone, irretrievably lost. Like blind kittens, they tried to grot their way to each other's hearts, but they were locked with giant locks. On his next visit, he met his grandmother. Maria hugged and kissed him, and even shed a tear, but she did not return the feeling. Martin kept catching her pitying look on his face, and he felt uncomfortable. His father tried his best. Martin could see that, but he felt guided by guilt, by bitterness of remorse, which superseded his father's love. There was not the love with which he surrounded Evelyn. Here it was obvious to the naked eye that she was his beloved daughter, his comfort, his happiness, as well as Dan's. and Martin felt himself among them as a poor relative, trying his best to love, but lacking something. And this hurt his feelings. The one thing that kept him coming back to this family with stubborn consistency was Evelyn. Every day he realized more and more that he could no longer live without seeing her smile, her eyes, her gentle voice. He drew this love for her as if from a living spring and could not get drunk on it. He went there also for Dan's sake, because the baby was so sincerely happy to see him, and he would jump up in his arms and chirping, telling him about everything that pleased or saddened his childish soul. And his heart melted at this childlike sincerity and spontaneity. He already knew the story of Evelyn's failed marriage, and to hide it, he had hope. And Evelyn hoped to bring Kelly and Michael together, each time coming up with new ways, but was very hesitant about that possibility. He hadn't even figured out yet how he would present the news of his meeting his father to her. "And you just tell her everything as it is," said Evelyn, "and we'll invite her to visit." "She won't go," Martin doubted. Evelyn hesitated, then agreed with him. "I probably wouldn't have gone either. Not probably, but definitely. But what to do? After all, they loved each other, though it was a brief flash. But there was love. How it would warm their hearts now, and our hearts too." Evelyn looked so hopefully into his eyes, as if into his very soul, that he suddenly had a crazy happy idea. "Evelyn, I know what to do," he exclaimed. "What?" She perked up, coming so close to him that the closeness took his breath away. He took her hand silently and stared into her eyes for a long time. There was such fire in his eyes that she flashed back to the roots of her hair, unable to comprehend what was going on. Marry me," he said in a husky voice. Her eyes shone in response, flooding him with a new wave of unspeakable feelings. But with his next ridiculous phrase, he ruined everything. "And then, they will have to face each other." Her shining eyes immediately went out. "Oh, that's what you mean." She pulled away from him and said slowly, "You know, this is no joke." "I'm not kidding," he said hotly. "I'm dead serious." "Martin, don't," she asked quietly, and stepped away from him. And she whispered softly, "Otherwise, I could believe it." But he didn't hear those words, cursing himself to death for his stupidity and recklessness. Time seemed to stand still, suspended in a sort of tense pause. They were silent, moving painfully from the highest degree of bliss to the lowest degree of despair. What was to be done? A desperate thought tormented his mind. "You know." "What?" Evelyn suddenly interrupted his thoughts. She pulled herself together again, brushed the obsession aside, and was focused and determined again. "I guess that's a thought. Come on, let's do that. We'll tell your mother we've decided to get married. We'll pretend we don't know anything about your kinship. You'll go with her to get married, and they'll meet there. And then we might change our minds." She was animated again, her thoughts returning to the old scheme to which she had been completely absorbed. And Martin looked at her sadly and stubbornly thought that it would still be as he had decided. By nature straightforward, Martin wasted no time in preparation, so he simply laid it out to his mother that he was going to marry a woman with a child. Faced with her incomprehension, he suddenly burst out, "You're the one who raised me without a father." And he did not even notice how tons of childish resentment poured out of him. And only when he saw her eyes full of tears, he came to his senses. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said guiltily. "I didn't mean to upset you." He saw her tears for the first time, and he felt uncomfortable. He pulled her to him silently. "You know, she's so cool. You're gonna love her." He pulled her away from him in excitement, peering into her face. His eyes sparkled with such enthusiasm and such love that her mother believed, without any further ado, that she was indeed cool. She could not have it any other way. Believed and suddenly calmed down, clinging to him. It was his choice. And Dan, her son, you should have seen him. Martin went on enthusiastically. "Remember how I always said I didn't like children? Well, he shattered my ridiculous theory in a heartbeat. He just climbed on my knees, looked into my eyes, And that was it. I was floating. His face lit up with a happy, dreamy smile. And also, her mother also married with a child. It was a great love. She died when Evelyn was only 10 years old, and her foster father raised her himself, never gave her to any of his relatives. Can you imagine? You should see how much he loves them, and Dan, I don't think even his own father could do that. I even felt a little jealous, he admitted with a smile. And you say someone else's child. There are no other people's children if there is true love. Kelly hugged her son and listened with pleasure to his voice. It was not often that they spoke so frankly. His words stirred to the core. Lord, thank you for your son. Forgive me, unwise mother. She prayed mentally. What a clever boy I have. Save him from our mistakes. I want to meet her. She smiled as she listened to him praise her. I'm starting to like her already. Especially Dan. I can't wait to see them. Mom, thank you. I knew you'd understand me. So, next weekend they're expecting us. It was decided to proceed in stages. First to introduce Mother to Evelyn and Danya. And Michael was to join them a little later, at Evelyn's call. He was sitting in the cafe next door, sipping coffee in anticipation of his upcoming date. The meeting went as well as it could. Dan opened the door, and the fortress was conquered at once and for all by his beaming eyes and radiant smile. Kelly immediately squatted beside him, taking gifts and sweets out of the bags, and couldn't keep her hands off him. Evelyn and Martin just looked at each other with a smile, giving each other a thumbs up. Meet Evelyn, Mother. Her son introduced her to his girlfriend, and Evelyn did not hesitate to give her a heartfelt hug. And Kelly wept, unable to hold back her emotions. Well, I have a daughter and a grandson at once. I would never refuse such a grandchild. She patted the trusting head of Dan, who clung to her trustingly and jokingly added, Now you can't tear us away from each other, no matter how hard we try. At the table, Dan immediately took the place of honor next to Grandma, because that's how Kelly introduced herself to him. He kept telling her things, and she listened to his stories with a smile. It was amazing, but she felt so good to be around these people, who until an hour ago had been complete strangers. And now they were near and dear to her almost as much as Martin. What was that? A kindred spirit. Evelyn's voice interrupted her pious musings. I think Daddy's here, so I'll introduce you. Kelly stood up hurriedly, turned to the man with a smile on her face, and she froze in surprise. There stood Michael, the love of her life, the source of her sleepless nights and unused tears. Standing there, he looked at her with a shy smile, and he held out a bouquet of flowers. With an effort of will, she suppressed her feelings, took the flowers, and mechanically held out her hand to him. Thank you, Kelly. Michael, he said with a slight hesitation, hastily shaking his outstretched hand. Everyone sat down at the table, and there was an awkward silence. Even Dan was silent, curiously looking at the adults. Why had they grown bored? And it all started so cheerfully. I'll get some hot food, Evelyn said, gesturing to Martin to leave them alone, leaving Dan as a distraction. But when she returned to the living room 5 minutes later, her father was sitting alone at the table, his head resting on his hands. Where's Kelly? She asked, stunned, Martin's bewildered face peering over her shoulder. She remembered that she had urgent business. My father answered in a faded voice, and on Kelly's chair there was a hastily thrown bouquet of flowers. Evelyn stood in the kitchen window, crying. Martin quietly walked over and put his arm around her shoulders. The faker was drunk, and the trick failed. Evelyn smiled through her tears as she turned to him. What fools we are. We thought it would be so easy if we wanted to. I can imagine what storms we've stirred up in her soul. Dad's gone off somewhere to blow off steam too. God help them. Stop beating yourself up. We meant well. Yeah, almost gave both parents a heart attack, sobbed Evelyn. Did you notice how they became friends with Dan? Martin suddenly perked up. It was love at first sight. They couldn't keep their hands off each other. Yeah, Dan can do that. Evelyn smiled, and her tears dried. He's a heartbreaker. They began to tell each other vicariously about their first impressions of this meeting, smiling at Dan's sweet antics. And she really liked you, Martin said suddenly, and took her hand. You think? Evelyn looked at him and was embarrassed by his gaze and quiet handshake. I liked her very much too. She had such a kind look. It's a pity I had to deceive her. Why cheat? Martin squeezed her palm. My intentions are completely serious. Don't you see that I only come to you for you? And I thought for my father's sake. Evelyn was confused. First for him, and then only for you, because I can't live a day without our meetings. Evelyn listened to him and could not believe her luck. Her thoughts from the very first days were filled with this amazing guy. It was like an obsession. She couldn't drive them away from her, thinking all the time about how lucky the girl this guy would fall in love with would be. And sadly, she realized that her train had sailed. For her, her father had always been the standard man, the model of loyalty and faithfulness. And she had always dreamed of a husband like him. She scolded herself, trying to drive away the obsessive image, and even managed to do it once when she met Trevor. But after the collapse of illusions, everything was back to normal. And now she had Martin in her life, a copy of her father, like an irony of fate, like a challenge to her dreams. She could not sleep at night, tossing and turning with longing thoughts in her head and thinking, swallowing tears. Martin, why so late? She was 5 years older than him, and that depressed her too. And now he was standing so close and looking at her with those eyes. She even squeezed her eyes shut to ward off the obsession. When she opened her eyes, he wasn't gone. He was still standing beside her, holding out the box with a smile. Evelyn, marry me. I have loved you since the first time I met you. Are you serious? Why don't you believe me? Do I look like a liar? And my father had nothing to do with it. You should have known how happy I was when you told me you weren't his own daughter. His eyes didn't know how to lie. They burned through her, sizzled, and she wanted only one thing, that this moment would never end. God, Martin, how happy I am. Isn't this a dream? Kelly wandered slowly through the desolate autumn park, raking the fallen leaves with her feet. Its quiet rustle soothed her nerves, put her thoughts in order. My God, how is this possible? Why did you play such a cruel trick on me? How is it that Martin fell in love with Michael's daughter? Your sister, then? No, he said she was adopted. So there's nothing wrong with that. God, how ironic. Kelly sat down on an empty bench because her legs were suddenly unresponsive. Her heart couldn't calm down, and she took several deep breaths to calm herself down. Michael's face came back into view. How many times she had imagined in her dreams this meeting in different variations, had endless dialogues with him accusing, justifying, resenting, forgiving, loving, and hating. 26 years passed in these endless imaginary conversations, and then, when her dreams came true, she couldn't even get a word out. She just chickened out and ran away. She laughed hysterically. An old man passing by cautiously cowered at her and quickened his pace, but she did not even notice it. She awoke to someone's touch, flinched, and met her eyes with Michael's. He was sitting next to her, clutching her palm in his hands. Kelly, let's go sit in a cafe. We have a lot to talk about. Kelly obediently rose from the bench, and he led the way, not letting go of her hand like a little girl, as if afraid that she would run away again. She walked and couldn't feel her legs under her. All her sensations concentrated on that hand. They entered a cozy cafe and sat down at a small table with cushioned armchairs. A waiter came over and lit a large red candle in a transparent candlestick on their table, and everything around them was illuminated with a mysterious light. He politely placed a menu in front of them and froze in anticipation. "And please bring us some champagne," Michael suddenly asked, "and 2 plates of cheese and fruit slices. And about the hot meal, we'll discuss it now." He smiled at Kelly, his face as young and beautiful in the candlelight as it had been in her youth. And she, forgetting all the emotions she'd just experienced, smiled back too. After all, we have something to celebrate, don't we? They sat opposite each other and looked into each other's eyes. A few minutes later, there were 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne in front of them. There was a soft clap. Well, to the happiness of our children. He raised his glass, and they sipped the sparkling wine with their crystal clinking. It hit their heads instantly. Kelly, he took her hand again, and her heart sank. Why did you hide my son from me? Did you really think I'd give you up? I've been dreaming of him all my life. I wanted to tell you, Kelly said after a while. And I even came to see you, to your place of work, but I met your wife there. You must have hated me. I forgave you long ago. She looked up at him with sad eyes. You know, just now, on the bench, just before you came, I suddenly realized how much you loved your wife, remembering that Evelyn was not your own daughter. She shook his hand lightly and smiled. And you know, I felt so ashamed that just yesterday I was rejecting my daughter-in-law with a trailer. She blushed, afraid of other people's grandchildren. And it turns out they love each other so much. What are you? I had no doubt you'd get it right. Thank you for your son. He's wonderful. He's still having a hard time getting used to me. And I haven't been able to figure it out yet, but we'll get through this together. And your daughter is wonderful. I just looked at her and knew Martin right away. And I don't even mention Dan. She smiled brightly, remembering Dan's cute little eyes. It's just a miracle. And Michael openly admired her. Kelly, you are the miracle. Thank you for coming back into my life and forgiving me. The evening was truly magical. Kelly felt like the queen of the ball, and Michael's admiring eyes, his trembling hands that never let go of her hand, only confirmed her feelings. She was happier than ever. Preparations for the wedding took up all their free time. Luckily, Michael had a for better times deposit open, which is what he called it. I can't stand it when they say, for a rainy day. Why involve him? There was enough money for all expenses, even for the wedding trip. She waited for his every call with the impatience of a young girl and felt his answering thrill with joy. Mom, you have changed. You look prettier, Martin suddenly noticed. It's from being happy for you, she smiled back. We had our wedding in December, just before Christmas. There weren't many guests, but everything was bright and beautiful. The bride in her exquisite peach dress was simply gorgeous, and the groom was just like her. But all overshadowed Dan. He participated in all competitions, answered all the questions so that the laughter did not stop for a minute. And the enterprising toastmaster, having caught the trick, did not let him out of his sight. But the happiest was Kelly. When she entered the hall in her gorgeous turquoise dress, slender and beautiful, Michael could no longer take his admiring eyes off her. He sat on her left hand, whispering compliments in her ear, and a happy smile on her face. The day after tomorrow, the kids are leaving for Bali, she whispered in Michael's ear. I'm taking Dan for New Year's break. No, Michael answered her with a smile, only complete with me. She looked up at him in surprise, arched an eyebrow high. I will die of loneliness, he complained capriciously, and you will be to blame. You won't die, grinned Kelly. You'll get a break from everyone for a long time. Loneliness is very useful sometimes. How about you join us? Michael's eyes were as innocent as an angel's. We have a bigger apartment. You'll have a change of scenery. Dan and I will spoil you, take you to the movies, to the Christmas tree. After all, the vacations are coming up. Well, Michael, it's kind of indecent or something. She took a sip of champagne and suddenly something tinkled in the glass. She looked into it and pulled out a ring in amazement. Her head rumbled and everything spun around and swirled. She would have fainted in a moment, but he held her up. Kelly, marry me, she heard through her hazy mind. I love you.